With 28 Democrats and 14 Republicans in the last legislature, it's not likely the balance of power is going to shift in New Mexico State Senate. But with a host of retirements and the state's two most talked about races in the Senate, as usual, there's no shortage of drama. So joining us this week to run down the races to watch, principal of the Garrity Group PR and former state Senate staffer, interestingly enough, Tom Garrity. A lot of folks don't know that about you. Right. Editor of the website Capitol Report New Mexico, our good friend Rob Nikolewski is back. Former New Mexico House Republican whip and proud Lobo football father Daniel Foley. You should be proud. Attorney at Law's Laura Sanchez is back in the mix with us this week as well.
I also worked in the Senate.
You did work in the Senate as well, see?
Our credentials.
Taken out by police escort.
She was not. Now, let's start with the biggies. Governor Martinez's effort to take out Democratic Senate leaders Michael Sanchez and Tim Jennings. Mr. Jennings' district, 32 in the Roswell area, should have a Republican in it, judging by political performance and voter registration. But there he is, Dan, and he's been there. Is he really at risk of getting upset by Cliff Pirtle here, or is those performance numbers telling us something that he should be worried about down there?
Well, remember, they're new numbers now. The district has changed with the last redistricting, and I think he is in some trouble. You know, I used to joke when I was in the legislature with Tim Jennings that he talks like Tarzan, votes like Jane. And it was always, and he used to laugh at it. We'd always poke at each other. You know, we'd go up to Santa Fe, slate of Republicans, and then Tim. So I do think he's in some trouble, and I do think that some money's being spent by the governor and by other folks in that community. They've taken a run at Tim Jennings every so often. It seems about every 10, 12 years, somebody steps up, and we've had laid it on the radio station. We had, took a run at him quite a few years ago. So, but I do think this year he's in some trouble. I do think that that district has changed a little bit. He's got Mescalero, goes up into Mescalero, part of Ruidoso, down into Roswell. So I think I wouldn't count Cliff out. It's a hard-fought battle.
Sure.
I mean, they're slinging some serious stuff. But what's interesting is I think at the end of this, both him and Michael Sanchez, it's interesting, for years the Republicans ran and got a ton of people elected against Manny and Raymond. It was always Manny and Raymond. When Manny and Raymond left, we lost our boogeyman. I'm not sure that after this deal we're not going to have a boogeyman. Even if they win, that's not going to be Tim Jennings and Michael Sanchez.
Interesting point. Rob Nikolewski, in your reporting, I want you to follow on what Dan just mentioned. For the challenger, there's a huge challenge here because the incumbent has a ton of dough and is spending it on television up here in Albuquerque and all over the place.
Yeah, Jennings has spent $203,000 by the last check that I had from the Secretary of State's office, which is the most I've seen. And Sanchez is no piker either. He's at $189,000.
Sure.
So there's a lot of money being thrown around, and that's another issue in this race, or in all of these races, is that it seems like the amount of money being spent has just increased by so much. I think it's because there's so much at stake. I mean, the Senate's not going to flip over to the Republican side, but the Republicans' best case scenario is it becomes more competitive. It could flip over on the House side, but that's a different story.
Sure. Laura, with Dan's mentioning of the changes in that district as well, how impactful is that in your view for tactical reasons for Mr. Jennings at this point?
I think he's going to be fine. I think that, we forget that Jennings became Senate Pro Tem with the help of Republicans. I mean, it was a coalition who helped elect him. I think he's had some longstanding Republican contacts, roots, support in that district. And I think the message is resonating. In particular, this idea that, you get to pick whoever it's the same sort of message as what happened in the other Senate race and with, I'm forgetting the name right now.
Clovis.
Yes, in Clovis, thank you.
With Pat Woods.
Right, with Pat Woods. It's the same sort of idea. Like, don't let someone from outside tell us, who's going to represent us. And I think he's enjoyed support from the Republicans for a long time.
Is Mr. Jennings, last question before we move on to Michael Sanchez, is he effectively beating that idea back with these television ads and other things, other ways he's spending his money?
Certainly for me it's hard to say because I live in Albuquerque. So, I see the ads and I obviously I can see the ads from both sides, but I think that probably more effective in those parts of the state are the local contacts, are the person-to-person, knocking on the doors, going back to basics, and he's probably doing fairly well with that. If you look at the numbers that Rob mentioned, it's 5-to-1 that he's raised and spent to his opponent. That money goes a long way in rural parts of the state, and I would say that person-to-person contact is making a huge difference for him.
Right. Tom Garrity, Michael Sanchez, the majority floor leader, has a huge impact on what gets debated, passed, killed in the Senate. We all know that. Now, State Rep David Chavez left his post as challenging the senator in Valencia County. That's District 29. And you think about just point we're making this other race, the money at play here is just really quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
it really is. And, I mean, obviously everybody focuses on Senator Sanchez with regards to the amount of money he spent, but how much have special interests pumped into that particular race? I mean, the negative advertising that special interests have pumped into that particular race is huge. You have regular mailers that are basically extorting a lot of different types of issues and stuff, and not presenting the true story. And so that creates a real challenge for Senator Sanchez in that he needs to go and spend his time saying, okay, here's what the real story is. And so that can be a challenge, and for those ground campaigns, it can take a lot of energy, but that's why you need to have a lot of folks going door to door.
Sure. The challenger certainly has full support of this administration and others, outside groups, outside money. Is that going to be enough, or for constituents there, is the idea of losing power a bigger idea than making a change?
It depends on where you think you're going to gain that power from. So often some of these heavy Democrat communities understand that they feel the power lays with the governor, and so it depends on where people like the governor is polling in those areas. I think there is a difference between rural New Mexico and urban New Mexico. It is a ground game. Who is going to get out and knock doors? And sometimes after you serve in the legislature 18, 20, 30 years, you kind of don't feel like you want to go knock doors. And sometimes the 28-year-old will get out, really bang on those doors. So, I think that there's a lot of money being spent. I understand what it's like to have a lot of money spent against you. And, I think it's going to make a difference. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the ground game. It's going to come to who can get their people out to vote. But people have to remember, when you talk about these folks that have been in office for a very long time, you get some really strong support, but you also build some really strong enemies. And, if you can do enough to weaken the support and coalesce those enemies along with the people that are undecided, I think the big winner in the whole deal, though, I think is going to be, we've talked about it before, I think is the governor. I think, I've said this here before, the only thing that politicians hate worse than bad press is a well-funded opponent. And I think that the message is being sent, if you don't agree with the governor and her agenda, she's coming after you. And I'm going to tell you, I think with the other 110 people in the legislature, when she starts meeting with these legislators and saying, let me tell you my agenda, there's going to be a lot of people in there that are going to say, I don't want $250,000, $300,000 spent against me. And I think you'll find some people moving more in her direction because they're fearful of that, regardless of the outcome.
Interesting. Laura, I'm going to go with you. Let's move up to your neck of the woods, where it used to be. Senate District 9, encompassing part of the North Valley, Corrales, Bernalillo, Mr. Sapien, the incumbent Democrat. Redistricting again has turned this into a very competitive seat that a lot of folks wouldn't have imagined so competitive just a few years ago. David Doyle, state rep from the same area, so he knows the district knows him. This race is interesting to me. What's your thought there?
It is. It's very interesting, and I think it's razor thin in terms of performance. I mean, it's 1 percentage point. If you look at how it performs Democrat, 50.5%, 49.5 Republican, and then about 3.7 other. So that, to me, I always find the other interesting when it comes to to the tight races like this, because by registration there's about 14.1% who are declined to state or other, and those people are not necessarily inclined to just accept one party or the other, lock, stock, and barrel. So those people are really looking at how that person resonates. Does the message reflect my values? Sure. And so I think it comes down to what kind of mailers are they getting out there? Are they hitting the doors? Are they talking to people and really communicating? I think with a well-targeted campaign, it's anybody's game, really.
Anybody find that declared to state number, as that Laura noted, just really interesting in all these districts?
Well,
it's amazing.
Especially, I believe it's House District 36, where Andy Nunez is running as an independent, as a decline to state, and never has anyone won an election straight out as a decline to stater. I'm going to make one bold prediction,
Please.
And that is the election is November 6th. I think at midnight, when we strike midnight on November 6th, we're still not going to know who's going to win in a number of races. I think a lot of them are going to go to recounts. We had 2 or 3 that were, one was decided by 10 votes. The Cliff Purtle race in the Republican primary was
2 votes, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And I have no reason to think that this is going to come down to a recount in a lot of races. We may not know who's got control of the House.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, too, on the Doyle Sapien, that's where I live now. I will tell you, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because this attack on David Doyle that has been leveled by Progress New Mexico, I think it is, where they've gone after his wife, gone after his family. I'm finding a lot of folks who were soft Sapien supporters, people who really didn't care, have been energized for David Doyle now. And I think that's going to be interesting to see what that does, because I think this is a whole new spectrum that's happening, a whole new area of politics is happening in the Doyle-Sapien race. In the past, we always went after the candidate. You went after the candidate, you went after Manny and Raymond. Manny and Raymond came after me. You talked about their votes, you talked about their businesses, you talked about the things they did. It was always kind of a sacred cow. You didn't talk about wives, you didn't talk about kids, you kind of let those people do their thing. This has been a very targeted race at David Doyle's family, and I think a lot of people, so what I'm saying to summarize is, I think it's going to backfire on John Sapien. I think this has been a bad deal for John Sapien. I'm not saying he did it. I'm saying the fact that it's being done, I think, is going to backfire on John Sapien.
It's going to be one to watch, isn't it? Now, Rob, let me stick with you on another one. Down south, Doña Ana County, we've seen some population shifts. We talked about Mary Jane Garcia is no longer the lock it used to be. She's been in the news lately for other things. You've reported this, campaign finance violations in quotes, so to speak. Lee Cotter, is there an opening here in the District 36?
There is an
Given all that.
opening.
Okay.
But she has 3 times more money than he does. She's already defeated him twice in previous elections. So I don't know if, and I was talking to some Republican people last week, and I asked them, you think this is now winnable because of Mary Jane's problems? And they were still kind of hedging their bets. They were going to do some polling and all that. I think it is winnable, and I don't think Mary Jane is doing herself any favors by, first of all, telling Gotti Schwartz at Channel 4, well, you can't expect me to keep track of the law while I'm on the road, and then also,
which is an instant mailer.
right, and then also challenging the Secretary of State's office. Originally, she said, "I'll pay the $1,200 fine. I want to get this behind me so I can concentrate on my campaign." Now she's fighting that, and I think this gives the story more legs. If just looking at it not from a nonpartisan way, just from a political consultant sort of position, I would think, you, Mary Jane, you've got 3 times more money, you've got all this name recognition, bury this thing and move on. And the fact that it still hasn't moved on, I think, is a negative. But I don't know if it's enough for her to lose.
That makes sense. I'll get you on that same thought for Mary Jane. It's easy to get a little loose when you're the long-term incumbent, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think that's what we was being inferred to earlier. It's very easy to get complacent, and I think that those types of comments is what we're hearing now, is a little bit of complacency followed with a sense of urgency, like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have said that if it was my first time running. So but is she in trouble? I don't think so. I think it's a bit of a ding, but it's not anything that's going to move her off the road.
I think it depends on also what Pierce and Romney and those folks do down there. Pierce is running in a race, and Cruces is a big battleground in that 2nd congressional district. I mean, there's a lot of money spent by Republicans. You know this. They're really targeting in Las Cruces Hispanic vote, border city. It's going to be the way the 2nd congressional district goes in the future. So what I do think hurts her is that if Congressman Pierce and the Romney folks and the Heather Wilson people, Heather Wilson's been down there twice now for rallies, once with Governor Martinez. I think the whole new wrinkle in this is you have a sitting governor who's from that community, and if she weighs in this deal, in New Mexico, one of the things I found outside of Albuquerque, they like their home person. They like the person from home.
But the thing is, Gene, that I think based, of all of the districts that we've looked at, that district has the highest Dem performance. It's 53.2% Democrat to 46.8%
And what would
Republican.
that mean on a snapshot view? Who does that tilt towards?
Oh, that tilt. I mean, well, it tilts towards Mary Jane. So it's, and more so than any of the other districts we've discussed on this show so far. So, I mean, that means basically that for the Republican to win, they'd have to pick up a whole lot of Democrats. There has to be some crossover votes, which means you really have to target to get those extra Democrat votes. And when you have the top of the ballot that includes high-profile Democrats, the president, Martin Heinrich, and then a local, a lot of other local races also. It's tough to get that crossover vote.
But no straight party voting. No
Right.
ticket. That's
That's
interesting,
true.
that difference there. Much more to watch than we have time to get to on this program. We'll be at it live on election night on Channel 9.1. Also, find our state Senate campaign finance map on NewMexicoInFocus.org. And we're back in a minute with higher education bonds.